World War I, the first major war to an industrialized world, had shattered the illusion of romanticism, and thus the horrors of war plagued the minds of the American public for quite some time. Yet, as we do, America bounced back, and just in time for its roaring 20s, a time of freedom and expression. Part of this new free spirit was fueled by an ever-evolving entertainment industry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Jazz in the 1920s. A seeming cross between slave blues and the newly developing ragtime, jazz first came to prominence in the 1920s. Being an almost entirely black art in America, not yet cured of its racism, much of the older audiences found the newly popular jazz to be crude signs of a devolving world. Yet, their kids, as kids tend to be, were very rebellious to their parents' opinions, and thus jazz began to become ever more practiced and performed. Although blues was invented on slave-owning plantations, the roots of jazz can be traced back to New Orleans, where the easily distinguishable style gained its name in 1917, after performers began to play the music on riverboats that floated up and down the Mississippi. Being that jazz was played on the riverboats, jazz could easily spread to cities that were also banked on the famous river, and so jazz eventually spread from Chicago to New York. These cities became known as the new homes of jazz, and jazz legends like Louis Armstrong moved from New Orleans to these cities to begin their careers of fame. Indirectly, Prohibition helped the spread of jazz as speakeasies became very popular as jazz clubs, and in 1922, Louis Armstrong moved to Chicago to play jazz in some of the clubs and speakeasies there. And this is where Louis began his career. Similarly, Duke Ellington moved to New York in the same year and played in similar jazz clubs. As men like these began to develop their styles, many dances and songs grew in popularity around 1923. Jazz became a very popular dance music of the time. Also developed around now was jazz's signature idea of an improvised solo, which helped further distinguish jazz. Improvised solos made every single performance unique, a quality that can't be replicated by a recording. This helped increase showings to jazz performances, as nowadays this new style had begun to be professionally played in some pretty famous locations. In 1924, Louis decided to move to New York, as New York was still booming and Chicago had seemingly slowed down. And so then New York became the official capital of jazz. Heavily popular jazz infiltrated the American entertainment industry for about 2 decades, as the so-called Jazz Age ended with the Great Depression. Jazz also helped the women's rights movements in great strides, as a good female musician could become just as famous as a male musician, as the heart of jazz encouraged good music with little segregation based on race or gender. Less notably, jazz helped the saxophone gain importance as a jazz instrument rather than a concert instrument. In 1928, one of the final major jazz spots of the 1920s came to popularity, with Count Basie gaining fame in Kansas City. Although all 4 cities were and still are major jazz spots, there are big differences in the styles of each city. While New Orleans, the origin, still relies heavily bluesy, this didn't bide well with the white Chicago audiences, and thus in Chicago, jazz was adapted to be more formulaic and follow the rules of music theory. Yet New York went in the other direction. They chased after the ragtime sort of things, and pushed the idea of having strange new rules even further. Kansas City, however, focused on a big band side of things, and kept up having a tight big band sound. The 4 cities allowed a much bigger expression within jazz, which encouraged its growth well beyond the 20s and jump-started the development of the first major all-American music style. Thank you for watching. This has been Jazz in the 1920s.